everyone. We have Francis back soon too. And welcome to SydneyAlt.net January, and welcome to 2025. So we have Phil here today, who's going to talk to us about all things LLM and using it in other places in your workflow as well. And I think he's promised some more fine-grained control, TDDing it, and a multi-monitor setup, and side-by-side stuff and all sorts of things. But just before we go into it further, I'll let you know also that we have some prizes to give away. We have the usual JetBrains licenses, and we also have 2 tickets to Programmable in March. So that's like a one-day conference that's well worth going along to and having a look at, especially if you have a free ticket, but you can buy one. But on the other hand, just answer the questions at the end and you could get a free one. So I'll just see if anyone's there in the chat. So say hello in the chat if you're here, please. Let's see. Make sure we've got a decent audience. Okay, Alan's question. I did see your question in Meetup. I didn't have a chance to reply. So are the tickets available for Sydney event only, or can they be used for the Melbourne event? I think I haven't confirmed this. I have to check with the Programmable team, but I think you can have it for the Melbourne event if you want to. So yeah, do try for it at the end. Oh, good. It looks like we've got quite a few people. Is the stream coming through clearly to everyone? Hello in the comments. Yes. All right. That's very good. So seasonal greetings to everyone. Yes, and Happy New Year to all, if it's not too late for that as well. So after that, bit of an intro, Phil, do you want to fill in with more detail? I think Phil's promising to give us more than the usual kind of do your coding with LLM stuff.
Okay, so if you remember me from last time, I was just getting started with a whole using the different LLMs and getting into Grok and Gemini. But I'm happy to say a lot has changed since then. So there I was just getting my feet wet. But now I've come back to SydneyAlt.net to explain to you what I actually use every day for my own personal workflow. So everything you see here is battle tested. Everything you see here is stuff that I built, and they're all techniques that work for everybody. At least if you're a pretty good dev who likes to do things a certain way. Obviously, the disclaimer is there's more than one way to do this. This is the way that I've found works for me. There's tooling out there that has agents that do all this stuff for you. But this session is around understanding the concepts and what to do so that effectively you end up pair programming with an LLM or an AI, and it actually does things faster than you can, and doing it at a rate that makes a lot of sense, and you control every step of the way. And that's what we want to get into. So there's a lot to get through, but it's going to be a lot of interesting stuff. And hopefully everybody learns a few things along the way.
That sounds really good. So do you want me to bring your screen sharing at this point?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'll stick it on the side here. There we go. I'll put you on
the
top. Here we are. And also,
cool.
Has presented with us, many times before. So a very popular and enjoyable speaker. So I'll hand over back to you.
Okay. So this would scare most speakers, though. But when I tell people I don't really have anything prepared, it's only because this stuff is around the workflow that I've got. But to give you a little bit of background, along the way of using large language models like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, I found that there was a lot of pain points. And what I did to address a lot of the pain points along the way is I wrote my own tools. And I'll walk you through that. But I'll explain to you those links that you see at the top. So there's a few tools that I've just open sourced right now. They're so open source that I don't even have a license posted on there yet. But thanks to my company, which is Path Foundry, both Knowledge Clip, Diff Clip, and Elementor are all open source under the MIT license. So you could use them right now. They are available right now. And I'll walk you through what each one does before we begin. Right. So now the story is that when I started coding with these large language models, the biggest problem that I had when I asked it to do stuff is that it just did not understand what I wanted. Like anybody that starts off with ChatGPT, say, well, code me a web page, it doesn't quite run the way you want to because it doesn't have enough information. And there's a lot of time you have to spend explaining to it what you want. And if you don't, it gives you something that you don't want, and then you have to throw it away anyway. So these first two tools, namely Knowledge Clip and Diff Clip, although if you look at the repo itself, it's quite simple. It's quite deceptively simple. And all it does, especially for Knowledge Clip, is it allows you to take any folder in Windows Explorer, right-click on it, and copy the contents of that folder and its subfolders into memory so that when I prompt ChatGPT or Claude or any large language model, I can post the entire repository contents into one prompt so that all I have to do is right-click on it and then copy it and then paste it into the prompt, and then it'll actually give me everything and a complete code dump of any repository, so long as it fits within the context window of that particular large language model. That's one thing. And I'll show that to you very quickly in a second. Now, different is...
Sorry, how many lines or kilobytes or whatever can you use for Knowledge Clip?
I've done entire microservices on it. So you can take the top folder, right-click on the top folder, and in Knowledge Clip, there's a config file in there that actually allows you to pick which file extensions you want to copy into memory. And it's really interesting because you can basically go through an entire folder, and if I wanted to just get all the C# files, I could just change the config file and then right-click on the folder, and then it's really just copying it to memory. And I'll show that to you in a second. Now, the other tool that I've got is something called Diff Clip. Diff Clip is an interesting tool because after playing around with Gemini and different large language models like Claude and ChatGPT, I started breaking the web clients because they couldn't actually take that much text. It was really interesting because you might have a large language model that takes about 100K tokens or a certain amount of tokens, but the client itself has a limitation on how much you could paste. So when I was pasting entire repos into it, and I was asking it to look at the entire repo and plot out what I wanted it to do, it wasn't able to do it. And of course, with when you start working with large code bases and you give the entire context window or the LLM, the code base to actually look at and say, this is what you got to do with it, it exponentially starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger because as you make changes to it, and as we'll see, it gets really inefficient trying to just send up the whole thing over and over and over again. So what Diff Clip does is it effectively copies, it actually uses Git in the background and looks at the diff from last time you committed and the changes that you have proposed and sends up the diff into the clipboard. So what you could do is you can copy it and then paste it into memory. So what I'll do to give you that, guys, I know it's a bit hard to explain. So what I'll try doing that will give you a bit more clarity around what I can do with this is I will paste, let's see. Okay.
Quick question for you, Phil.
Sure.
From Alan, have you used Copilot Chat, e.g. in VS Code, which allows attaching files to a prompt?
I never have. Mostly because the way I was working with it was like I don't use Copilot, and it's because of the LLM that was attached to it, which was like 3.5 or something. That was a bit too old for me. Let me actually see what I could do. So I'll give you an example with some of my old libraries. So I've got an old library from my LinFoo days, which is LinFoo Finders, which is just a fuzzy library for doing fuzzy search. So you can see this in open source. It's been there for like 10, 15 years. So it's not that interesting in the sense of what it actually does, but what is actually more important here is if I'll copy it into memory, and I'll show you what the paste looks like. You're not going to be able to see the right click because it's just a mess trying to switch windows. But I'll show you what I've got, what the large language model sees. So as you can see here, I've got a blank window. I've got linfoo.finders, which is an old library. But when I paste this, you'll see that this is actually an entire file paste of the entire repo.
It's got
so what it
for the files. So I use start a file, right? I see.
Yeah. So what this does is it tells your large language model of choice, I've got this file, this file, this file, this file. Here's the start marker for this file, and here's the end marker. And if I scroll down to the very bottom, it actually covers everything to the point where you got to the end of the file dump here, and you got the end of all the file dumps here. Now, the reason why this is so important is that, as we'll see later on, when I want to ask a large language model to do something for me, I need to give it an entire code base. Now, why would I want to do this? Because the number one problem that I've run into with working with large language models is that it's a lot of people think they're magical, or you ask them something and they'll be able to guess it right away. But the reality is, the more context that you could feed it, the more effective it becomes. So the number one thing that we have to do in this case is make sure that we're always giving it enough code so that it can see and plot its way through that, so that it knows what to do and why you want to do that. So before I continue, those are the toolings. Okay, and there's one more thing that I'm going to switch back to, which is the last large language model client. One I call LLMs, which is basically, I'll explain to you the story behind it. So one of the problems that I had when I started working with these web-based large language model clients, like especially Claude, is either they would run into memory limitations where they would actually get to, or I get throttled. So if anybody's worked with Claude for an extended period of time, you will find that I think 20 or 30 prompts in, it'll say, well, you got to wait until 1 o'clock in the afternoon before you could actually continue. What was interesting is that restriction does not apply if you actually have an API key and you're using it through a third-party client. The problem I had was I didn't find any clients that I could easily work with where it was just, I had one question and it would give me one answer, and I could work within any IDE that I wanted. So for those of you on the call, I'm using Sublime Text, but there's nothing stopping you from using VS Code or Writer or whatever you want, because how LLMs works is you can type the questions in the IDE, and the answers would just come back, and depending on the IDE, it would refresh and it would just pop up on the screen, as I'll show you. The important thing to note here is that the reason why I went with LLMs was I wanted something that was bare bones. I could ask questions and I wouldn't have to context switch and leave my editor environment to be able to write and copy stuff over. I know Copilot does this a little bit more intuitively and changes stuff for you. But as you'll see, a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be asking it to do, you can't quite do in Copilot because there's a lot of prep work that we're going to be going through that actually makes it so much easier for number one. What we want to do is give the requirements first. Like essentially what we're going to be doing today is I'm going to be talking to Claude like it's a developer. I'm going to say, here's the requirements. Here's what I want to do. Do you have any questions? And then it's going to come back to me and say, well, this is what I need clarity on. And it's really interesting because the way I talk to Claude or the LLM is anybody, like any other person, where I say, well, before you jump into any task, I want you to understand this. And if you don't understand this, ask me the questions. And there's certain standards that I want you to follow so you don't run off in the wrong direction and all of a sudden I get code that I can't use. So that's basically what we're going to be doing today. That the combination of these three tools, or at least Knowledge Clip and LMinster, and the techniques that we'll use will make it so much easier for you to get code that is bloody simple and at the same time just gets the job done. So before I continue, does anybody have any questions?
Question for you. So are you using Claude exclusively these days?
It depends, right? Because Claude is, there's two models within Claude. So there's Sonnet 3.5, which is effectively the gold standard. I use it when I really need stuff that no other model could solve. There's Haiku 3.5, which is also good, but not as great as Sonnet. However, it does have higher token limits per day, and it's much cheaper. So that's the other thing to consider. There are other models like O1 Mini and O1 from Anthropic that you can use. I also support open routers through LMinster, so you can use any model that is listed on Open Router. But generally speaking, for coding, I stick to Claude, Sonnet, and Haiku when it's not as critical. O1 is okay, but in terms of speed and the quality, it's always going to be Claude. And it's very
much better than OpenAI ones, even though the latest.
O3 is not out. O1 is okay, but O1 Mini, I get mixed results. But every time I've always gotten great results with Claude Sonnet 3.5 through the API, as well as Haiku for just day-to-day coding tasks. And Haiku has like a 50 million token limit per day, whereas Claude has like 2 or 3 million. I haven't checked. It depends on your subscription tier or API tier, but generally speaking, with Claude, it's quite generous. Cool. Any other questions?
We got one here. So George is asking, what if the repo has hundreds of lines of code?
That's an interesting one. I've tried doing things like load up Roslyn. That didn't work. But that's an interesting case where if it's 100,000 lines of code, you do have to spend a little bit of time picking out which parts of the repository you need to get through. Like even out of the 100,000, you could conceivably pick a folder where you want to focus on, and then pick a larger model like Gemini Flash or even Gemini Pro. And since they have larger token windows, it's very easy to post a larger chunk of the code base, provided that you respect the data privacy issues that come with it. And then send it up to Gemini Flash, have it plot out what needs to change, and then copy the plan over to a different model like Claude and say, this is what I want to do. So there is a bit of prep work there, but if there's 100,000 lines there, you do have to do a bit of filtering to make sure that you can focus on what you need to do. But generally speaking, what we're going to be covering today are the more common cases where you're like, right, I've got this piece of this service that's been there since forever. I need to wrap tests around it, or I need to document it, or I've got these new requirements and I need to plot a way through to get from point A to point B, but there's a lot of noise that I need to filter out. How do I do it? And that's what we'll do today.
Sounds good. So question from Andrew. DeepSeek, have you had a chance to play with it?
No. And the reason why is the only way I could trust DeepSeek is if I could run it locally, and I can't run it locally.
Mm-hmm.
The problem I have with DeepSeek is the privacy concerns. If you go through the DeepSeek API, there's a good chance that they will share it with the next model that they're going to be training on. So if you really care about your models being not being reused shared with certain source code, then that's why I don't use it. And at the same time, I do have an O1 subscription, not the Pro, but just regular O1. So if I really needed something hard fixed, I would actually just give it to O1 and then transfer to other models and then go from there.
We got another question about running a local model. So presumably one that you can load the whole repo into ideally, or I mean the other side not mentioned here, but is like the privacy concerns, I suppose.
Yeah, I haven't actually written an Ollama extension for Elementor, but in theory, if you've got a good enough video card, you could run some of the smaller 8B or 1B or 2B models from Llama, because I did see that. But for me, it seemed a lot more cost effective because with some of the stuff that I work on, I'm actually asking for multiple streams from different LLM APIs at once. And yes, while I can connect to my one instance that would run it with like 20 tokens a second, what if I have to do 10 of them at the same time? That's going to kill my video card, or I'm going to be sitting there waiting for a long time. So in practical terms, it's better right now, at least for right now, until we get the hardware and the software efficiencies out of the way. It's better to pay for the API through Open Router. Actually, that's probably the best place you can do, because you can try different APIs that way. And it's actually smart enough to route it to the right provider based on price, which is another thing. Give me a sec. I just need to fix this. Okay.
All right. Meanwhile, I'll just read Alan's one that local models have a limited context window depending on the model, from Alan as well. And
you can still hear me, right? It's just my camera went out.
Problem. Your camera's kind of just giving you a splash screen.
Yeah, just ignore the camera for now.
All right, and I suppose just a question on the privacy concerns. Like, are you happy to upload proprietary code and stuff? Because if you're just uploading a little bit and then getting the model to help you with a little bit, then you haven't uploaded the whole lot. But if you're putting your whole repo there, it's the next stage of giving everything away. So what are your thoughts on that?
I only do that with providers that are reputable, that have what I call mutually assured destruction. Like, they know that if anybody got word, like for example, OpenAI, that got word that they're actually sharing their people's code, they're going to have a lot of people that are subscribing unsubscribe, which is going to tank their shares and whatnot. My perspective is that if you're okay with giving your code away, or you're asking something that is generic enough as not to give it away, then you could probably use something like DeepSeek or a free API like Gemini Flash, even the experimental ones. But if data privacy is important to you and your company, then you should be using, you should definitely be using the paid APIs where they say, we're not going to train on anything that you've got. And that's just as important. Which is why everything you see here is actually based on APIs that effectively don't share anything with anybody else. So that's why I can afford to do stuff like paste my entire repo and not lose anything.
Yeah, I think last time I checked, like if you're using the chat, like the web page chat interface to chat GPTs, then they could train on it, right? But not if you're using the API. Right?
There's an interesting part about that, but I don't want to go off into a tangent.
Right.
ChatGPT,
get back to the actual presentation and stop
yes, sorry.
For now. Okay. So if you'll go.
I know it's really easy to get lost. Okay, guys. So here's the 3 tools. Make sure you get a copy of them, and some of them have good instructions, some of them don't. All right. So what I'm going to do is let me cut over to Elementor. So I'll explain to you what Elementor actually is. It is a command line file watcher. That all it does is it watches a specific directory for specific files. How it works, let me just share my screen very quickly and swap over. Now, how this works, sorry, Elgato's not cooperating with me, but at least my screen is, so let me just fix this. Okay. So what I'm going to do is, if I could find the damn window. Okay. Presentation notes. Okay. So I'll walk you through this one while I'm trying to sort out my first world problem with having too many monitors.
And we don't have your screen, Phil, at the moment.
I know. I'm still trying to sort through.
No worries.
Okay. So, right. Let's see if I can do this right. I'll try sharing my entire screen, but forgive me because I've got my big ass monitor and it's not going to look right.
One in again. Here we are. Wow, that's wide.
Okay.
Is it
super ultra wide? All right.
You might have to zoom in quite a bit.
Okay. So I've got my Elementor directory. What Elementor actually is a whole bunch of C# scripts that are dedicated to one particular large language model client. And what they do is they actually watch for a specific type of file extension that is your question file. And how that works is I could type in any question in this question file, and then there's an answer file that comes back like a few seconds later from the large language model. Now you might be wondering, why do you do this? Because that seems a bit weird. Don't you have a web client? Well, yes, we do. But what I found is that I actually, in some cases, when I loaded up a web client session with, say, ChatGPT, and it's got so much crap in the window, the browser actually struggles to keep up with what I actually have there, and it slows down. So I figured, why don't I just focus on something where it just gives me the question and the answer, and when it loads up, it'll just come up on my editor window. So this is why I wrote this. So if I've got one Claude script here, but I do support different clients. So I haven't really updated this one. But the idea is, yep, so there's CSX files here. So I've got things like GPT-4o, I've got O1 mini, it's still O1 preview, but I heard now you could use O1. But generally speaking, for me, I use Claude pretty much all the time. So this is using Claude Sonnet. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm using, the reason I did .NET Script instead of a full-blown .NET program is everything, including these scripts, is actually written by a large language model. So when I actually make a change, it's kind of one of these reinforcing feedback loops where I can actually just load this up into a large language model, change it, and then write the changes back. So what I'm going to do now is I'll actually start the Claude client, with
Do you
.NET
think
Script.
in a bit for us and make the window a little bit bigger? I feel it's just a bit small. If you can make it take more of the screen, it might be pushing our 720p a bit past the limit.
Yeah, this is pushing 720p. Can everybody see this?
That looks better to me. Does it look all right to everyone in the chat?
Yep, thumbs up if it's good.
That looks better. Yep. We got everyone saying it's better.
Okay, so I got .NET Script, which is basically allows us to run these C# script files, which is CSX. And I just started Claude CSX. And what it does is I already have this directory called questions. Now, the difference with Elementor as a client is I can run multiple, I could ask one question and jump between different models depending on the file extension. So in theory, I could have another, say, GPT-4o, CXS running in a different window, and they would watch for specific file extensions. The Claude one looks for this file extension you see here with Claude Q. Now, the way this works is that when I type something up, it'll send the question up to Claude, and then it'll actually tell me when it came back. So I'll give you an example here. I'll drag this one out. So I got this template that I have. So I'm not going to drill into this one, but essentially, what I can do is if I go back up to this code dump, what I'm going to do is, let's try something interesting. So what I'm going to do is wrap tests around this, because this is actually a project that has no tests. It was actually a handover of a handover of a handover that's been sitting there for well over a decade. So I know what it does, but it's really interesting because this is a very familiar case for everybody. You're handed a project, you don't know what it does. You either need to document it or you need to do something with it. So what I'm going to do just to make this a more practical case is I've got this prompt that basically says, here's how I want you to work. At the same time, this is probably the most important thing. There's certain standards I want you to follow. 1, Yagni. 2, solid. 3, KISS. 4, dry. Now, I'll drill into that, but let me sort out these prompts first. So what I'm going to do here, and this is just a template that I have, but I'm just doing this manually. And normally I would actually take the requirements here and type them out. This is basically for a templating system that I'm still working on that's not quite ready yet. But essentially what I've done is I've taken an entire code dump of my code base, and I have a template here that basically says, right, so take a look at this code. This is how I want you to work. Here are my requirements. Do you have any questions? So for requirements, let's start with, I'm a new developer. This is my first day. I don't understand this code, but I need to wrap tests around it. So I'll do that. Okay, so if I zoom out, you don't have to understand the whole thing, but essentially the prompt here is this one template that basically says, here's the entire code base. Here's how I want you to work. And here's my requirements. And what I want you to do is ask me any questions in case there's things that I might have left out and it's not clear. So the important thing that's different here that you might see from different types of prompting that you would see out in the wild is I'm intentionally telling Claude, Sonnet in this case, do not write a single line of code until, or at least you start asking me some questions, and then we'll walk through it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually take this and do C : questions. So I'm going to save this. Demo 1 CSS. Okay, so it's interesting because if you don't see it here, but what it did is actually, oh, that's fine. There's a slight demo fail, but that's fine. Oh, okay, there we go. So what you could see here, let me just zoom into my screen, is that Elementor works this way. So when I save the file, which is demo1.clogq, with the question that I just showed you, it took a while, and then it wrote the answer to this markdown file. Now, the reason why this is useful is because I could go to the markdown file right now, and then I can go to here, and you can see that on this side here, this is what came back from Claude. So the interesting part about this one is it came back to me and said, well, here's what I understand. And it tries to explain it to me. So this is useful in the sense where you walk in, you don't understand what the code is. And if I scroll down, you could see it starts asking me questions like, all right, so do you want to start with basic usage scenarios first, or dive into specific features? Do you want to focus on unit tests or include integration tests showing common use cases? Other things like you want to use XUnit, NUnit, or MS test. Right. So it's interesting because the next step, what I would do here is just jump to here, and it feels weird, but what I'm actually going to do is completely blow away this question file and say answers. Number 1, do you want to start with the basic usage scenarios? Yes, show me the basic usage scenarios. Since it is my first day. Okay, and then secondly, when it says, should we focus on unit tests or include integration tests? And then I would just start with, well, given that I'm still new, I need to understand how it works. So I want to use the tests as documentation for usage. 3, do you want to use specific testing frameworks? Yes, I want to use XUnit. 4, do you want to test organized by feature and by class? Let's go by. Okay. So how I normally work with large language models in this case is I answer the question, and then I ask it, right, so show me your proposed approach in an outline sorted by dependency order. Does everybody get why I'm doing this? Those last 3 words that you see here is an interesting trick that I learned, because what it does is it gives you an outline, and then completely sorts it in a way that makes it so that the items that have the least dependencies are the ones that you do first. So you could pick from a list and actually do them. And then the ones with the most dependencies will actually be the last. So effectively, by the time I actually get to a point where I'm looking at this outline that it gives me, I could actually just go back and forth and pick stuff off of that list and just copy and paste stuff over. And by the way, this is fairly slow for me, because I know I'm going very, very slow, because I want to make sure everybody gets this. But watch what happens when I do this. So I've got two windows open here. Now keep in mind, this can happen for any IDE. This is just Sublime Text for me, but this could be in any IDE that has any kind of refresh. It could be Notepad++, it could be Visual Studio Classic. It could be anything, provided that you could have these two windows open, and then you could just ask questions like this. So I'll send this one off and then wait a little bit. As you can see here.
Question for you, Phil.
Sure.
Is it sending the previous stuff as well as your current answers?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
So it's just kind of appending each time you add more answers. It's just adding that to what you sent last time.
Yes.
A whole lot again.
Yeah. So that's why it's exponential. This is actually what every single large language model client, whether web or desktop, is doing. They give you the illusion that it's one continuous chat session, but in reality, it's an API call that's sending the whole state over, and then asking for a response back.
Yep.
So as you can see, this came back around 9 seconds, which is good. Obviously for Claude, ChatGPT 01 is going to be longer, but depending on how big your context window is, it'll get much, much slower naturally, because it has to churn through a lot of information to do that. So as you can see here, it looks like I haven't updated it yet, but as soon as I flip over, you could see that the update is fairly immediate, because all it did was a refresh on the changes on the file in the IDE. So what it's saying is, I'll help create a test suite that demonstrates the basic usage scenarios using XUnit organized by features. Here's a proposed outline ordered by dependency from most basic to complex features. Now it's interesting, because what I could do is I can create another window. And I know, forgive me, this is so manual compared to a lot of the stuff that you would see with Klein and Cursor. But the point here is that in every single step of the way, you have full control what's actually going on. You don't have a rogue coder that's going off and just doing some really weird shit, and you're like, oh no, that's not what I wanted to do. So what I'm doing here is I can ask it one by one, like, what section do I want to tackle first? So it has this outline, and I can ask it to give me the tests one by one. So for example, this is the latest answer. If I say, right, so let's start with the first set of tests, I could say, give me the tests for, and I know we're on a time limit, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I want to show everybody this. So give me the test for the fuzzy item tests. What it'll do is, as you can see, it'll take about 10 seconds.
Will this work with O1 or GPT-4?
Yes.
It's Claude. I mean,
yes.
Having this kind of questioning set up, I've never really tried myself, which is cool. But is it across them or just Claude?
It will work across them. Like on the LM Insert page, it actually shows you how to jump between different LLM clients using the same context. So I can do something like get Flash to plot out the overall plan, because it's got a wider context window. And when I get to the more specific stuff, I could cut over to Sonnet or Claude, and then cut over to GPT-4o for cost. I mean, there's a lot of things that you could do with this. So as you can see here, it took around 17 seconds to generate those tests. We don't have enough time to actually go through and run them, but I'll try to speed through this quickly. So when I refresh, you could see that it created the test file. It looks like any other XUnit test. Now, the best part about this one is, although I don't have time to do all of it, although I'd love to, you could take this and paste this into your XUnit project, run the test, and then when, hypothetically, if the test were to fail, I actually just paste it into this window and say, fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And what it'll do is, since it has a clear idea of all the code that you have in your repo, what it'll do is say, oh, sorry, I forgot to change this test, or here's the new version of the code that you need to change in order to fix the test. Does that make sense? Any questions? Because what I'm actually doing here is taking that outline it initially gave and just doing a bullet point by bullet point one of saying, right, so part one, you said that you could do this one. Part two, you could do this one. Three, this one. And I could take every single one of these tests and just copy them over and then run them. And if it fails, I paste it into the window and say, fix it. And it'll fix it. Claude is really good at this, by the way. And this is essentially the gist of how I do it. I know it took a little bit of time, but generally, it's a slightly different when you do Greenfield. But essentially, what I do is I actually have it write the outline for me.
Yeah.
And then I just take the outline, the single items in the outline, say, do this. All right, so give me this. And then when the test pass, I jump to the next one and the next one and the next one.
So is the magic the show me your proposed approach one of the big bits of it?
Yeah.
To get it to tell you what it's going to do without just, running off and doing a pile of stuff and forgetting some stuff.
Yes. So the interesting thing is when you ask it, show me your proposed approach, and then you get to say item 4, and you're like, oh shit, how do I change my requirements? Because I got this new requirement, but it's at a point where it hasn't written that section yet. The interesting part is you could actually change it and say, well, I want to add this new thing. Give me the updated code and give me the updated test. So it changes it on the fly. The interesting thing about this is, even though this is just giving you the tests, in the same approach where it's you ask it for the outline, you could even say, give me the implementation in one file and then a tests in the other file. Now, why would I want to do that? Well, I use Writer a lot. So what I do is I ask it to give everything to me in one file and use Writer to split the implementation. And then I ask it to generate the tests at the same time and split that in the same fashion in the test project. So the really cool thing is I could run both the tests and the code side by side. And it's like TDD on steroids, because unlike your traditional TDD where you have to think about the tests and do tests first and then write the code, this already has both figured out. So you could ask for both the test first and the code, or vice versa. And this actually eliminates the hallucination problem, because it's not just trusting the output of the large language model. It comes out with the tests that proves that it works every single time. And if it does break, you take the output from the tests and say, fix it, because this is what I've got.
Sounds good. So we've got a few more questions. So from Andrew, we've got, is the original pasted concat repo still there in the question.claude file?
Here's the interesting part. So there's a third file there called the context file. So there's a context file here. And behind the scenes, I actually have, for every single entry, there's a question answer pair. And this is the whole history of the conversation. So this actually has the response that came back and the question that was sent up. So behind the scenes, this entire file is actually being set up and down, back and forth. What you get in the answer file is really just the tail end of it. But to answer your question, Andrew, the whole history of your conversation is stored locally on disk. So if you're concerned about privacy, provided that you're using an API that respects confidentiality or data privacy, then you're okay. And all the stuff that you've talked about in the past stays on your local disk.
Right. And so Andrew is also asking how you add more context as you
go. You just paste it into this window, the questions. So the interesting part is knowledge clip was my secret sauce for a while. Back when I thought that providing the entire context of a code base was revolutionary. When it isn't, it's useful, but it's not as revolutionary in hindsight. But to answer your question, you could, with something as simple as knowledge clip, you could actually take an entire repo, paste it into the question file, paste a Jira ticket in there, and say, this is what I'm trying to do. Here's the requirements. Can you plot out the plan for me and show me what the absolute minimum path to getting it done will be? And 99% of the time, it will plot it out. And it's such a jarring thing, especially for a developer like me who is used to like having to do this stuff manually. And you're like, all right, what code do I have to research? What do I have to do? No, this is completely different because you take the entire repo, or at least a good chunk of what you want to work through, you feed it to the large language model through knowledge clip. And just like I showed you, where I said, well, here's the context, here's how you work, and here's my requirements, give me an outline. And then the next step really is picking through that outline one by one until I get through the whole outline and it's done. And then afterwards, I actually have different prompts that do things like retros and things like that. But that's more for later. But essentially, this is the gist of it. This is a very rough and scrappy version of what I do. But essentially, no matter how big the code base is, when I've got even like technologies that I'm not familiar with, the thing that blows me away is I ask it to do stuff in languages that I don't completely understand. And I say, well, this is what I want to do at a high level. Here's the requirements. Walk me through it because I'm a complete newbie. How are we going to do it? And because it breaks it into that outline, I could just pick one at a time and say, right, so if we're halfway through, if I wanted to have a look at what I have, I actually ask it later halfway through and say, right, so where are we on that outline? What's been done? What's remaining? So it's really interesting because I'm really pair programming with a large language model, and it's keeping track of what we're actually doing as we're doing it. It's much different than what you would normally get with Klein or Cursor, where it runs off on its own. This is actually works side by side with you. So if you're working through stuff and then all of a sudden you have to change requirements, it's not perfect, but it's certainly way better because you have complete control of what's going on. Like you still have to do the work of just copying stuff from one window to the next and running the tests. But for the most part, it eliminates a lot of the guesswork because from my experience, a lot of the problems that developers have in doing the work is really understanding the code. The fact that I could take any code base of reasonable size and then paste it into a window and say, right, this is what I want to do. Let's cut out all the noise and tell me exactly what we want to do in an outline and sort it in a way so I can just pick stuff off of it. I've seen accelerations of around 10x, depending on what it is. But in this really simple case, what's really interesting about it is you can write tests around existing code that nobody wants to touch, and it would be able to plot it out and sort the outline in such a way that you just follow it and you actually get through stuff. This is the difference. a lot of the, as I said, a lot of this stuff has been field tested. A lot of it is removing a lot of the fluff and the hype and just getting to the work. And this is how it works. Now, I didn't actually have time to run the tests and then check it. But essentially, the gist of it is that you run the test. If everything passes, you move on to the next thing and the next thing. If it breaks, you paste it into this window, and then you say fix it, and it'll fix it. So, any questions? I know I've been waffling on, but hopefully everybody understands the basic workflow.
That sounds good. Are you happy to share your general prompt of like whatever you ask?
Oh yeah, sure.
Tools and things like that.
Sure. So the general prompt I have, I'll post it onto the comments. Actually, I'll put it on private chat just so we could just share it.
All right, sounds good. I'll just paste it through to the public one as well.
So once you get that template, there's just placeholders that you could just replace yourself with an editor or your favorite templating tool. But essentially, all it is.
Yeah, if you can just email it to me, maybe because it's been truncated by the.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And I'll paste it in. Hopefully, when we get truncated in the public chat. Otherwise, we can put it in a meetup comment or whatever.
Okay, so hopefully you can see that.
Andrew says stick it on GitHub. On a gist.
Oh yeah, I'll put it on a gist.
Yeah, the does that make sense stuff is quite cool as well. Getting the model to discuss with you more rather than just telling it what to do.
It's I think one of the most amazing yet common sense. I like to think is common sense is that if you treat the large language model like another developer and you say, "Are you sure you understand?"
Yeah, it
actually gets back to you and says, "Well, I'm not sure, but I have a few questions."
Yeah.
So let me see. Let me try putting this up on private chat. There's the gist. So I'll walk everybody through this while I getting the gist through. So the key thing here is that when you ask it, so one of the secrets that I found with any large language model that knows how to code fairly well is that if you don't do this, even Sonnet will give you a lot of crap. They will give you a lot of messy stuff. But the minute you ask it to follow Yagni, you aren't going to need it. Solid principles, KISS, keep it simple, and drive, which is don't repeat yourself. All of a sudden, that outline that would normally give you, that gives you a lot of fluff, you could cut your code down around 50% or more. All of a sudden, this thing that would give you all this over-engineered stuff would just give you exactly what you want. And you could try this later on with any project, but that template that I posted, once you get into a conversation with the large language model and saying, well, this is what I need, give it to me in dependency order as well, it'll actually give you that thing. And then you just pick off of the outline and it'll just say, here's the code, here's the code, here's the code. And then you just confirm that the tests are running every single time. If it's green, you move on and you keep going and you keep going. So can everybody see the gist? You should be able to see it.
I put in the comments. Everyone got that?
Okay. So that's pretty much my primary starting prompt. Now, the actual way, so this prompt is actually built for Greenfield. So that's why if you look at it, it says you will provide all implementation types, that is the types that we use in production, in a single file and wait for my confirmation that it builds correctly. because I found that sometimes it gives me stuff that doesn't compile. So what I do is I actually just take the implementation type, build it even without tests. If it builds, then I move on. And I said, all right, so give me the test fixtures, and I keep everything in one file. Why do I do that? The reason why I do that is JetBrains Writer or ReSharper, whatever you use, will automatically split that later anyway. The important thing is that you get all the types and all the test fixtures into your solution. And if they're both green and everything builds, then you can move on to the next thing and clean it up. So it's really, really interesting because I've seen that in many cases, I can get Claude to write 10 tests for me in one go, along with the types, whereas I would probably be spending a lot more time thinking about writing 1 test, 2 tests, 3 tests. No, it'll do 10 in one go. And you could keep running the tests. And this is basically the TDD version of, what we used to do by hand in 2004, 2006, or wherever TDD was invented. So that's really useful. And then it says, once the solution builds correctly with the new code and tests are green, I'll run the tests to ensure that they pass. And if they break, I want you to fix it. And then after that, we move on to the next section and so on. So as you can see, this is the workflow I do every single day. And it works for me because I have complete control of the code that is generated. At the same time, I inspect every single code that comes through, and I'm like, well, if that doesn't look right, I'll go back to the large language model and say, are you sure you want to do this? Or wait, this looks a little bit over-engineered. Is there a better way to do this? Now, the last part that you have to be careful of with this approach is that even though you are working alongside with a large language model, sometimes it still goes off into these rabbit holes where it fixates on one tiny thing. Like, for example, I've seen it happen on a couple of occasions where it got obsessed with logging. And I was like, well, is that really part of the overall set of requirements that I need to test? Do you really want to test my logger? And it says, oh, no, it doesn't. And I say, okay, then stay focused. So again, it's like any other developer. They get really interested in one thing, but you say, well, wait a second, this is what we really need to do.
Can you get it to, like, I mean, with the outline, right? Show me your proposed approach. Can you get it to actually, like, give you a good design for a greenfield component or even a greenfield?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. This prompt that you see here is for greenfield. So what's really interesting is you can give it a prompt that basically says, well, this is what I'm trying to do. And you will have to spend, so this is the interesting part. So it feels really weird because you're going to be spending a lot more time working on requirements and explaining what you actually want done. And this is the most important part. You tell it, I do not want to see a line of code until we agree on what the approach is going to be and whether or not this works or meets all the requirements. So just like a normal person, you tell them, right, I don't want you to code until you actually understand what are we going to do. Once we understand that, then it's pretty simple because it's very clear and you just follow that outline. This is pair programming with a large language model. Follow the outline, get the code out, get the test green. If it's green, you move on to the next thing. If it fails, you get it to fix it, and then you keep going.
That's very cool.
But yeah, that's the gist of it. There's a lot of other stuff that I'm doing, but this is probably the most practical workflow that you can have because with the tools that I built are built so that when you ask a question, you're not waiting on the web browser to actually get back to you. Because I've seen that happen on a couple of times where it's like the web client or the JS or whatever it was running behind the scenes just kind of sat there for a while. And it's quite jarring to have to context switch. But if you're working within an IDE and you already have something that works like, Notepad++ or Sublime Text or VS Code, then you don't have to leave the IDE. You can just have another window. Now, for most people who have multiple monitors at home, it makes a lot more sense to have it like this, where I've got my IDE in one window or one monitor and the other one, a big screen like this, where I'm basically asking the questions on one side and getting the answer on the other side. And then I'm checking all the time to make sure everything's okay. The part I didn't actually get time to show is diff clip. Now, diff clip is really interesting from a token management perspective, because what it does is it only sends the diff. It's just like doing a git diff and copying it to the clipboard, and then paste. And then when you paste it, you can paste it into a prompt. So that's all it is. But it's really useful because what you can do is do side-by-side coding within a large language model, and you're typing something up. You save it to a file, and then you copy the diff into memory, and you ask it, so how am I doing? Does this look right? Or what am I missing? And it can look at the diff and say, well, I think you need to, everything looks okay, but you missed this part. So that's essentially, these three tools make it easier for you to work with a large language model and work side by side. And its ability to cut through all the noise and give you that outline for you just to follow step by step makes it so that you could do things like a complete rewrites that would take entire teams to do, because they've got all these meetings, all this time that they need to take to understand the code. Whereas if I could just take the entire context, give it to a large language model, and it knows, it understands enough of the code base, then it'll plot it out for you. And that's exactly how I get my acceleration. And this is it's almost my secret sauce, but let's just say it's useful enough that anybody with a good degree of practice will be able to do it. Now, if you're still here and you're not using Cursor or Klein, then yeah, I mean, this is probably for you. If you're more of the, just do this for me, then yeah, you can just ignore everything that I said. But yeah, hopefully this is useful. And that's it. Any question? Let me see if I can actually fix my, let me see if I can fix my camera.
All right. Any questions from the chat? Okay, very useful. I must say that's quite mind-blowing, some of the new stuff you showed today. It's very cool.
Okay.
And George says, thank you for the gist. Francis is a bit lost with the audio. Yes, Francis's mind is blown as well. Alan says, thanks for sharing. We got some bits of camera up.
Yep. So let me just.
Wow, this is a really hard one to ask questions to the audience for. We've got 4 prizes to give away. Can you hear us still, Phil? I think we might have lost him briefly. So yeah, we've got the 4 prizes to give away, and it's tricky to give you the questions. Hang on, we'll see whether we get Phil back in a sec. Yeah, all right, so Phil's gone out and be back in a sec. We should have him in a minute. Yeah, we got 4 prizes. So while we wait a sec for Phil, I'll think what I'll ask. All right,
okay.
Yeah, Phil back.
Okay, so questions?
I think I'll ask the audience some questions because they've run out of questions for you, so that's only fair. So first question for one of the programmable licenses, not licenses, programmable tickets, and I think can be Sydney or Melbourne, is what are 2 key ideas from Phil's approach that you've seen today? In the chat, whoever gets it right first gets the first of the programmable licenses. So I need two answers. I can see Alan and Andrew's got a good answer, but Alan's got sending the prompt that instruct to use good coding principles. All right, I think that's good, Alan. Maybe Andrew, if you can give a second one, then I'll give you a license. I mean, a ticket as well. And congrats to Francis, who's going to be a speaker at Programmable as well.
Break a leg.
You got any other one, Andrew? It's kind of the same as Alan's one. All right, I'll give you one anyway. I mean, I didn't say they had to be exclusive of each other. All right, and you went into more details. So, well, I was thinking I'd give both away. So, one programmable ticket to Alan and one programmable one to Mr. Nose Ratio. So send me an email just to remind me. I think I probably got your emails, but send it to me so I know who to reply to, and don't have to review the footage. No, just email me. Just send me a meetup message with your email address. And that will be very good. We'll give away 2 more tickets next month as well. So if you missed out today, don't cry too hard, because you got another chance next month as well to get one. And then we've got the JetBrains licenses to give away as well. So easier question: which model is Phil using most of the time? I mean, which company provider, at least, if not the exact model.
It's not Microsoft.
Shh. There you go. All right, George, I think you got one there as the first answer. Claude Sonnet. And let's see. So for the last one, what do you treat the model like when you're talking to it? Looking for one word here. We got Skynet, but that's not the right answer.
Double the beatings until morale improves.
That's right. We got any other answer? Anyone going to answer? Yeah. All right, Andrew, did you need another JetBrains license because you've answered it? Otherwise, we got anyone else? Otherwise, we can give to Waze Online for their first answer of Claude as well. All right, maybe we give the other license to Waze Online, or how do you Waze Online? However you say. Sorry. All right, very good. So we've got the winners for the JetBrains is George and Waze Online. So send me a meetup message with your email address, and I'll send you through the deets. And the same for Andrew and Alan for the programmable tickets too. So we're always looking for speakers. So let us know if you've got something that you'd like to talk about. Again, meetup message is probably the easiest, and we'll chat with you about it. And yeah, thank you very much, Phil. That was really interesting.
Thanks, guys.
You've really taken it to a new level, and it seems better than the commercial tools, right? Which is pretty cool. Maybe you'd better get a job with one of the tooling providers.
But this is just a reminder. All the stuff I have there is MIT licensed, so download it, use it, and let me know if there's anything you need. Because the other slight plug is that Elementor does support Open Router. There is an Open Router provider there that you can use. So it's not just the ones you see. If you see anything on Open Router and you've got credits on Open Router, just plug in your API key. You should be ready to go.
It's very cool. Yeah, I must say, mind-blowing, actually, the way you've taken, I mean, it's the same models, but you've used them so much better. So, yeah, it's really, really impressive.
Yep. Well, hopefully it'll help you guys work more efficiently. And at the same time, there's the hype and there's the not the fluff. So this is the stuff that helps you get the job done. So hopefully that helps.
Thanks very much, Phil. All right, so we'll end the stream now. Yeah, we'll stick around a tiny bit afterwards, but yeah, the stream will be ending now. So thank you, everyone, and good night. Many thank yous on the chat. See you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.